Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, this is our second live stream of the day, and both cases that we're talking about are extremely controversial. The case of Richard Allen, he was sentenced today, is controversial because many people doubt whether he is actually the person who murdered Liberty German and Abigail Williams. But the case of Luigi Mangione, the one we're going to be talking about tonight, is controversial for an entirely different reason because of the purpose or the motive behind what he did. He was initially arrested in Pennsylvania on various charges, such as gun charges, but immediately the authorities in New York began to fill out information and to file charges against him related to the murder of CEO Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. And the arguments that they made were that he was actually the person who committed the murder, but that his reason, the purpose for doing that, was related to his hatred of healthcare and of healthcare corporations in America, of his belief that corporations are greedy, and particularly healthcare corporations. Now we have a brand new complaint that has been unsealed against Luigi Mangione. This complaint has been filed in federal court. It is also related to the murder of Brian Thompson. So it's related to the exact same circumstance. There's one case filed in state court and another filed in federal court. That in and of itself is controversial, but it has been permitted by the courts for there to be cases in both locations. But in this particular case, we now have it unsealed and we have brand new facts, information we did not know about before. Since I'm about to take a week break, I didn't want to leave without going ahead and filling you in on the brand new information that is in this very important unsealed complaint that is now available to the public. So the reason I'm doing two live streams in one day is because I didn't want you to have to go an entire week without this information, without knowing what is involved and what the new charges are. They are extremely, some of them are very graphic. All of them show a lot of research and a lot of tracing done by authorities, federal authorities, to find Luigi Mangione. So I want to go ahead and get that started today. Started tonight and tell you about what is in this unsealed complaint. A special shout out to the first five in the chat tonight. Avalon CN was very first, also for, earlier today. Just me, Teresa, Maria Z, Dan Ciego 67, and Camilla Giuliana. Okay. And that was actually six, but since it was Avalon's second time, I went ahead and added the fifth. So for those of you wondering, when did Lee stop being able to count? All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look at what we now know about the federal complaint. Going to add it to the stage and then make it, yeah, that's pretty good. I think it's even better there. I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's 10 pages, but not really that long because there are photographs in the middle of it. And I just feel like it's pretty important for you to get a flavor of what the charges as well as the facts are as they're currently known. So count one is stalking and travel in interstate commerce from at least in or about November 24, 2024 to in or about December 4, 2024. So for 10 days before the murder in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant, traveled in interstate commerce with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, and place under surveillance with intent to kill, injure, harass, and intimidate another person, and in the course of, and as a result of such travel, engaged in conduct that placed that person in reasonable fear of the death of and serious bodily injury to that person, and in the course of engaging in such conduct, caused the death of that person, to wit, Mangione traveled from Georgia to New York, for the purpose of stalking and killing Brian Thompson, and while in New York, Mangione stalked and then shot and killed Thompson in the vicinity of West 54th Street and 6th Avenue. So what they're saying in this is, you see that weird language about traveled in interstate commerce? You may be thinking, what is that about? Why is that in there? Well, the reason for that is that's the basis for the federal court to have jurisdiction over this. a crime that occurs solely within a single state is subject to the jurisdiction of that state, but not the federal courts. But because he crossed interstate lines, crossed between states, it is also a potential federal crime. It is now under federal jurisdiction. So they're explaining that it's because he went across state lines that they believe they have the authority to charge him federally. And then they talk, as you can see, about him traveling from Georgia to New York. Now, we had heard that there was a bus that he took that originated in Atlanta, but at no point was it really totally clear whether he got on the bus there. So this is the first information we have about that. There's going to be a slightly different statement a little bit later on that you'll see in just a minute. Next is stalking use of interstate facilities. And we're going to leave out some of that prefatory language and just get to the meat of it, that he used an electronic communication service and electronic communication system of interstate commerce, there's that language again, and a facility of interstate or foreign commerce to engage in a course of conduct that placed that person in reasonable fear of the death of and serious bodily injury to that person. And in the course of engaging in such conduct, caused the death of that person. And it says twit, meaning, in other words, to explain more, Mangione used a cell phone, interstate wires, interstate highways, and the internet to plan and carry out the stalking, etc., of Brian Thompson in the vicinity of West 54th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan. So again, they're talking about it. This is really put in a different form. They're just saying he went to a lot of trouble to plan what he was doing. And how did he do that? He used the telephone. The telephone used to be interstate wires, and it still is to some degree interstate wires, but used cell phones, used communications that crossed lines of states. And in doing that, became subject to federal jurisdiction, subject to having a case filed against him in federal court. And they're just saying he planned it, and he planned it in various states. He crossed state lines in order to plan this. Next, murder through use of a firearm. We'll leave out the stuff at the beginning, that he knowingly used and carried a firearm, and in furtherance of such crimes, possessed it. I'm trying not to use YouTube words. So, and in the course of that, caused the death of a person through the use of a firearm, which is, and they define it, to wit, he committed the crime against Brian Thompson in the vicinity of West 54th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan. So again, they're saying, and this time they're talking about a firearm. This is exactly the charge levied against him in both Pennsylvania and New York, that he had a firearm. That firearm, we now know, was actually made on a 3D printer. That is the subject of a particular charge in Pennsylvania where Mangione was caught. This charge is related to the actual commission of the crime using the firearm. And again, federal, and there's all the language about what he did in furtherance of it. Count 4, firearms offense, same timing, same location, during and in relation to crimes of V for which he may be prosecuted in a court of the United States, namely the offenses charged in counts 1 and 2, knowingly used and carried a firearm, possessed a firearm which was brandished and discharged, and equipped with a firearm silencer and firearm muffler. So they're just, again, talking about the firearms, and they're expanding it to include that as well. We are now going to get into the facts that were used to support these charges. Now, these 4 charges will be why he's brought into court. These are the charges where it said, okay, here are the things that he did that he's going to be charged with. What are their facts? What's the basis for that? And now we're going to get into that. And we're going to hear who is actually talking to us. And you can, if we go to the bottom, I'll zip down there real quick. Close your eyes if you get dizzy. This is Gary Cobb, special agent of the FBI. So these are facts as avowed by an FBI agent. You can see we're going to be seeing some pictures and so forth coming up. Okay, I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and am assigned to the FBI's V Crimes Task Force. I have been personally involved in the investigation of this matter. This affidavit is based upon my conversations with other law enforcement officers, my examination of documents obtained through a court authorized search warrant, my review of documents prepared by others, security camera video, and my involvement in this investigation. Because this affidavit is being submitted for the limited purpose of establishing probable cause, it does not include all of the facts that I have learned during the course of my investigation. Where the contents of documents and the actions, statements, and conversations of others are reported herein, they are reported in substance and in part, except where otherwise indicated. Now, forget all the kind of really difficult legal language and the way that it's written. Basically, what he's saying is, I talked to a bunch of other people who have done the work. I've been involved personally, but I talked to other people. That means that some of what he's going to say is hearsay. He's allowed to do that in this context. And he's saying, here are the things I looked at. First of all, we now know for sure there were court authorized search warrants. And we knew that on the state level, but this seems to be implying on the federal level as well. So he looked at what was found with search warrants. He looked at documents prepared by other people. This would probably be documents like the arrest warrant and the information filed in Pennsylvania by the people who arrested Luigi Mangione. He also looked at security camera video, and he was involved in this personally. He's going to say, okay, based on that, here's what I learned. On December 4th, 2024, at approximately 6:45 a.m., Brian Thompson, that's the victim, the CEO of a nationwide health insurance company, they don't name it, but we know it was United Healthcare, was shot and killed by a masked assailant while walking on West 54th Street toward a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, where a United Healthcare investor conference was scheduled to begin at 8 a.m. As discussed below, the shooter was later identified to be Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant. Security camera video showed the shooter, who was wearing a gray backpack, and we're going to hear a lot about that in the course of this document, come from between two parked cars, walk up behind the victim, and shoot the victim in the leg and back outside of the Midtown Hotel's entrance on West 54th Street. The firearm the shooter used appeared to have a sound suppressing device or silencer attached to the front of its barrel. A still image from the security camera video of the shooting is provided below. Now, we knew many of these details. We knew that there was a shooting while Brian Thompson was walking to an investor conference. That conference was going to start a little bit later that morning. It was 6:45 a.m. when he was walking on the street from his hotel across to where the investor conference was going to be held, and when he was shot in the back. The backpack that you see there in the picture, I'll scoot the picture up just a little bit. You see a light gray backpack. There has been much on the internet about that backpack, as well as in this document you're about to read. One of the complaints made by people about this, the investigation is, and the question raised, is that there is more than one color backpack shown on the people that the law enforcement has said is this person is Luigi Mangione, but in one photograph, he will be wearing a light colored backpack and another a dark colored backpack. The light colored backpack you're about to find out was found in Central Park. We don't know a lot about what's in it. The rumor is that it contained Monopoly money. That Monopoly money, we don't know a lot about what that was or what exactly the meaning behind that was. All right, law enforcement personnel who responded, I'll just leave the picture up, who responded to the scene of the shooting recovered, among other items, spent 9mm shell casings and at least one round of live 9mm ammunition. The words deny, delay, and depose were written on the side of some of the shell casings. Responding law enforcement personnel also recovered a cell phone in the vicinity of the location where the shooting had occurred. The words deny, delay, and depose that were found on the casings that were found at the scene are believed to be part of a message that was being sent to United Healthcare and to the world. The idea being deny a medical claim, delay meaning delay paying the claim. It's not completely clear what depose would mean. Would it mean depose such as ask questions in a legal case, or would it mean depose as in depose someone in authority and remove them from authority? That's not really clear what exactly that would mean. It may be explained in some of the writings that were found, but we don't have an explanation for that here. It was clearly, though, a message. It wasn't just a random shooting. It was nothing like that. It was something very intentional and very planned. And that's one of the arguments being made by both Pennsylvania, New York, and also by the federal authorities. The investigation. Based on my participation in this investigation, my conversations with other law enforcement officers, my examination of documents obtained through a court-authorized search warrant, my review of documents prepared by others, and my review of security camera video, I know that over the course of the next several days, investigators retrieved and reviewed hundreds of hours of recordings from nearby security cameras to track the shooter's movements both before and after the M. From that review, investigators were able to formulate the following timeline of the shooter's movements from November 24th, 2024 up to and including December 4th, 2024. So one of the things that we have heard a lot about is that, or we've had insinuation that there is going to be video camera. This is telling us that there are hundreds of hours of recordings from nearby security cameras. This was in the middle of Manhattan. So there were plenty of cameras all around. And we know that some of those cameras tracked the person that authorities say killed Brian Thompson and tracked that person away from the crime scene on an electric bike through Central Park, out of Central Park, and believe they have also captured photographs of the same person at Starbucks earlier that morning and also at the youth hostel where a person giving a false identity but believed to be Luigi Mangione was staying. So those we're aware of that, but he's talking about how many hours of tape there are. Another point is this extremely efficient and comprehensive investigation does mean that it's less likely that trial will be exceptionally fast because there will be a lot of information to review. November 24th, 2024. On November 24, 2024, at approximately 10:11 p.m., the shooter arrived in New York City on an intercity bus at the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan. The bus originated in Atlanta, Georgia. The shooter took a taxi to the area around the Midtown Hotel and stayed in the area for approximately 1 hour before taking another taxi to a hostel located in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which they're going to call the hostel from here on out. So there are a couple of issues around this. First, note that they do not say that Luigi Mangione got on the bus in Atlanta, Georgia, or even using a false ID got on the bus in Atlanta. They simply say that the bus itself originated in Atlanta. So that's a little bit different from the way I read that earlier comment, that this may be the actual point because there wasn't, as I understand it, they went and reviewed videotape at the Atlanta bus terminal and they did not see anyone resembling Luigi Mangione getting on the bus there. So maybe he got on later after the origination point. It's also interesting that they point out that he took a taxi, the person accused, and let me be very clear that Luigi Mangione has not been convicted. He's barely been charged. He's had no response at all to this. So that none of this is proven in a court of law, but this is the allegation being made by the federal government against him. So they're saying that the shooter took a taxi to the area around the Midtown Hotel, stayed there for an hour, and then took another taxi to the youth hostel. Could have been for any completely innocent reason, like getting a meal, for example, or maybe calling to figure out where am I going to stay. But there also might be a suggestion that this was an attempt to throw off any kind of tracing by switching taxis. We won't really know that until probably closer to trial. The shooter registered at the hostel under the name Mark Rosario and provided a false New Jersey driver's license as a form of identification. Now, they aren't worried about any of this being published because it's false. So none of this is doxing any actual person. This is simply false identification. So they just put the photograph right there in the court document. When the shooter was checking in at the hostel, the desk clerk asked the shooter to remove his mask, which he did, revealing his face to a security camera as shown below. Other than this interaction with the desk clerk, the shooter consistently kept his mask on throughout his time in New York, including while inside the hostel. The obvious reason that they bother to mention this in the complaint is their belief that the purpose of wearing the mask was not some kind of excessive worry about germs. There was no consideration that maybe he had an illness that he didn't want to spread or was afraid he would get one. The reason for wearing the mask was to disguise his identity. The fact that he wore it all the time, even while in the hostel, they're saying, is the proof that he consistently kept that on, and they're going to argue the reason was he didn't want to be spotted. He didn't want to be seen by security cameras. But there was this momentary lapse, and that's when his face was captured. Ultimately, ironically, I think that the capture of his face was extremely important, but he was captured while wearing a mask. So these photographs may not have been actually necessary to finding out and to pinpointing who it was who did it, because he was actually found without having to pull down his mask. People saw his eyes. You're going to see that in just a minute. And that was what prompted them to call law enforcement. On December 4th, 2024, that is the day Brian Thompson was shot, at approximately 5:35 a.m., the shooter left the hostel wearing the gray backpack, and they circle it there so you can see it, and rode an electric bicycle down Central Park West to a location near the Midtown Hotel, as shown below. And you see him walking there, whoever the shooter, and then they show him also crossing the road with a bike. You can't really see the backpack in that particular picture, but you can see it in the top one. At approximately 5:41 a.m., the shooter walked around the area of the Midtown Hotel and at one point purchased items from a nearby coffee shop. I do wonder how he knew he didn't have to be out and waiting. Why wasn't he worried? Well, at any moment, Brian Thompson could come out and walk by. I'd better be there and be ready. Apparently, he was casual enough that he went and purchased items from a nearby coffee shop. I find that surprising. Maybe he'd been casing it and he knew what time he came out. I don't know. The shooter then returned to a bench in the vicinity of the Midtown Hotel. On at least one occasion prior to the murder, the shooter was depicted using a cell phone. That has been speculated about a great deal on X. It's been speculated about on YouTube, in the media, on Reddit. People wondering, why was he on a cell phone? Who was he calling? Who was he talking to? Was this someone implicated in the murder? Was this someone feeding him information about when Brian Thompson would come out of the hotel? The Luigi Mangione, in a letter he wrote, you're about to hear about it, went to great pains to say that there was absolutely no involvement by anyone else, that he did this completely alone. And he even said, talked about it. We've covered his, what I call the manifesto. They're going to call it a letter. We covered that in our most recent video on this subject. I'll link it at the end if you want to hear what he had to say. But he clearly he even said that he was the first to have seen and to act on this. So he was not calling out anybody else. Nonetheless, who's he talking to on the cell phone that early in the morning remains a question. At approximately 6:00, and there may be some really easy answer, like he was calling to get a bus ticket or to find out the schedule. At approximately 6:45 a.m., after waiting near the Midtown Hotel for approximately an hour, the shooter saw and approached the victim, shot the victim multiple times, and then fled on foot to West 55th Street, where the shooter mounted the electric bicycle and rode towards Central Park. After disappearing inside the park for a period of time, the shooter was captured on video again, exiting the park near West 77th Street and Central Park West, riding north on Central Park West. When he emerged from the park, the shooter was no longer carrying the gray backpack, as shown below. So you can see in the picture, they show him, the whoever the shooter was with a backpack riding down the street. And then outside, and this is what I use for the thumbnail, this is a photograph of the same bike, they believe, the same person, they believe, but without the backpack. That backpack was later found, at least they believe it was, the light gray one. Then he was arrested with another backpack, leading to more questions. Why is this backpack, if it was left in Central Park, if this is the same person, followed through the park and then out of the park, and the backpack was left there, where was the other backpack all along? The one he was found with? How did he get that? Did he purchase another backpack? Or did he have it back at the youth hostel that he had to go pick it up somewhere, which would seem like a delay on the getaway? At approximately 6:58 a.m., security camera footage captured the shooter riding the electric bicycle near West 85th Street and Columbus Avenue. 2 minutes later, at approximately 7 a.m., the shooter was captured on video walking near West 86th Street and Columbus Avenue without the electric bicycle. At approximately 7:04 a.m., the shooter entered a taxi that drove him to the George Washington Bridge bus terminal in the vicinity of West 179th Street and Fort Washington Avenue in Upper Manhattan. The shooter's face was captured by a camera in the taxi as shown below. I personally would guess this is the photograph that caused people to recognize him, because more than one person sitting in that Pennsylvania McDonald's recognized him and was at least thought, could that be? There was an employee who thought that, but apparently not enough that she called. Then there was a customer. There was a group of customers that began to discuss it. One of them went and spoke to the McDonald's employee, who ultimately called law enforcement and said, we think this same person may be here. At approximately 7:04 a.m., the shooter entered a taxi that drove him to the George Washington Bridge bus terminal in the vicinity of West. Oh, did I already read that? So anyway, there he is, and the camera in the taxi. And at approximately 7:30 a.m., video footage from the George Washington Bridge bus terminal captured the shooter entering the facility. No video footage showed the shooter leaving the bus terminal, suggesting that the shooter left New York City. On or about December 6, 2024, law enforcement officers searching Central Park found a gray backpack matching the appearance of the gray backpack worn by the shooter as depicted below, and they show it. Now, there are lots of questions around this backpack. I will be unpacking the backpack. I'll have to call the video that in a later video. But if you have some thoughts about this, I would be really interested. There seem to be some problems with this. For example, from this timeline that they give, the shooter appears to go straight to the taxi and to the bus terminal. There doesn't seem to be time for him anywhere in here. If you look at the times, and we'll go ahead and we'll pull out and do one of our traditional timelines. We love timelines here on the channel. And so that we'll pull all that out, but it doesn't seem like there's any time for him to go back and get a backpack that was at the youth hostel. So that means he had to have been carrying on him everything that we carried all the way through. For example, the letter to the authorities. He apparently had a notebook of some sort, a journal, some kind of writings that related to what he was going to do, supposedly to-do lists and things like that we've heard about from the media sources. But how did he take all that with him if he left the backpack in Central Park? Did he maybe stuff it in pockets and then he bought another backpack, the one he was found with? There are just a lot of open questions around this. Maybe he had left something at the bus terminal in a locker, and maybe that he picked it up there. But there are some missing pieces that we need to figure out in order to fully understand whether law enforcement correctly followed the person all the way through Central Park and all the way then ultimately to Pennsylvania. All right, the arrest and identification of the shooter. Based on my participation in this investigation, my conversations with other law enforcement officers, my examination of documents and items obtained through a court-authorized search warrant, my review of documents prepared by others, and my review of security camera video, I know, among other things. So once again, he's just listing all of the places he went and looked. The point of what he's saying is to convey to the court that a lot of work went into this. This is not just his off-the-cuff impression, his belief. A lot of work and investigation and videotape went into determining that Luigi Mangione was the person who actually shot Brian Thompson. On December 9th, 2024, at approximately 9:14 a.m., so this is 5 days after the shooting, a worker at a fast food restaurant in Altoona, Pennsylvania, called the police about a male customer later identified as Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant, who the worker believed resembled photos of the shooter that had been broadcast in the media following the victim's murder. Members of the Altoona Police Department responded and encountered Mangione, who they also believed matched the appearance of the shooter. When approached by responding officers and asked for identification, Mangione offered the false New Jersey ID used by the shooter to check into the hostel. So that's a super important piece of information. That identification, which they believe to be a fake one, that is not a real person, but was used by Luigi Mangione. It was used by him more than once. He had it in his possession, and it was used by, they believe, the shooter to check into the youth hostel. So it's a link between Luigi Mangione and the shooter. That's the purpose of this ID. Mangione was later found to be in possession of a loaded 9mm pistol and silencer consistent with the weapon used to kill the victim, clothing that matched apparel that the shooter wore in the security camera videos. I would personally discount that. I mean, all he was doing was wearing dark clothes and a dark jacket. That is pretty generic. A notebook, they call it the notebook, several $1,000s in cash. That's been very controversial. An envelope associated with an FDIC insured bank, and a letter addressed to the feds called the feds letter. The 9mm pistol and silencer were later tested and found to be operable by a ballistics examiner from the New York City Police Department. Photographs of the firearm and the silencer recovered from Mangione are depicted below. And there is a photograph, and you can see the items that were found in his possession. So let's talk a little bit about this, because the things that were found on him were the subject of some real controversy, because at his arraignment, when simply the charges were being read, he had no attorney present. He had not yet met with an attorney. This was simply, can we hold him overnight until we can complete some charges? That's all that was being asked, was the very brief question of whether or not he could be held in Pennsylvania. He was not being sent back to New York. They were not determining whether he was guilty. None of that was happening. And he didn't even have an attorney yet. But this list was read, and he said something to the effect, according to people who were there, "Hey, I didn't have several $1,000s in cash. That wasn't me." There was also comment about how he had foreign currency, and he also apparently said, "I didn't have foreign currency." So this. Right. Notice they don't mention foreign currency here. They do mention several $1,000s in cash. Could be foreign, could be U.S. They don't really specify. But the suggestion that this money, that this evidence was planted on him, arose from the fact that he made the statement he didn't have that. It wasn't what he had in his possession. In other words, somebody must have put it there. That, if true, that would be horrendous. That would be a truly egregious violation of the trust placed in law enforcement. But we don't really have details about that. We don't even have a transcript of what he said. We just have reports of people who were there and came out and said, "Here's what I heard." So there is not really evidence at this time that anything was planted on him. But it is critically important to watch this. It is obviously a case where law enforcement very much wanted to catch the person who did this. But it is totally unacceptable for law enforcement ever to take shortcuts. That cannot happen. So evidence cannot be planted on anybody. That is critically important. So, and the 9mm pistol and silencer, they don't mention here being 3D printed, but we did learn that. In the course of what we heard related to the Pennsylvania charges that were levied against him. I realize I have been remiss over here. People have been, I have some people to say thank you to. Thank you, Dolly. 2 live streams. Yes, it's a lot for me. That is very unusual for me, especially 2 long live streams. The first one today was really long, but we had followed in detail the Delphi murders case. We absolutely had to finish that up and hear what the sentencing was. He got 135 years. For those of you who followed that along. Sorry, did I say 130 years, 65 times 2. So thank you. And thank you, KCAM4, for being a member for 4 months. That's fantastic. And Kylie H is a new member. That is wonderful. All right, let's keep reading about what the federal charges against Luigi Mangione are. The notebook contains several handwritten pages that express hostility towards the health insurance industry and wealthy executives in particular. For example, and this is our first peek into what's in the notebook. And let me just go ahead. I'm going to pull out for a minute and just talk to you about this because it's so critically important. The letter we covered in detail. That letter became public. It wasn't very long whatsoever. We covered it all in the last video about this. The reason it was so critically important, I used it to talk about the suggestion by the woman who accidentally or coincidentally would be a better way to put it, coincidentally was hired as Luigi Mangione's attorney. She was on CNN talking about what exactly the evidence was, and her comment, very brief, but I went into it, her comment that was shown on CNN was that there would probably be a lot of evidence against him. He would use the insanity defense. That's a paraphrase. I had it exactly when I covered it last time. So that's just in general my takeaway. That's not the exact words. But the suggestion was the insanity defense would be something his attorneys would look at. So I wanted to look at that in particular, that I called it manifesto. They call it a letter to federal authorities. Would that show that Luigi Mangione was insane and might win on the insanity defense, or would it hurt his insanity defense? And overall, I think it clearly would hurt his insanity defense, but it's really important evidence. It's something that will be fought over hard by both sides. And so I'll link that video at the end because if I know that you would be interested in hearing more about that. But we didn't have a peek into what the notebook said. We heard about it. We knew it was there, but we didn't know what was said. And here is our very first insight into what was said. So let's go ahead and add that back to the stage and get this right. Okay. The notebook contains, I said that, number 1, in an entry marked as 8/15, August 15, 2024, the notebook described how the details are finally coming together. And I'm glad in a way that I procrastinated because it allowed me to learn more about UHC, I would assume would be the acronym. The notebook entry also stated that the target is insurance because it checks every box. Some of the important things in this statement, the fact that this happened on August 15th was mentioned in one of the press conferences as evidence that he had been planning this for months. This wasn't a momentary psychotic break, is what the prosecution will argue. The prosecution will say he'd been planning this since August and did this months later, did this in December. So he clearly had plenty of time to plan it and to think about it. This wasn't a sudden mental illness that overtook him and that took charge of him so that he was no longer able to tell whether this was against the law. We covered what the rules will be around the insanity defense, whether it's against the law or whether it would be against community standards. And so we talked about that. You can watch that video and learn more detail about it. Also important is that this is talking about the target being not necessarily United Healthcare, but corporate greed seemed more globally the point, and insurance being the more specific target, UHC simply being a convenient way that he was able to express that. That's how I read that. In an entry marked as 10/22, October 22nd, 2024, the notebook stated 1.5 months, which was how far away the conference was. This investor conference is a true windfall, and most importantly, the message becomes self-evident. Later on in the entry, the notebook describes an intent to whack the CEO of one of the insurance companies at its investor conference. As described above, October 22nd, 2024 was approximately 6 weeks before the date of the murder of the victim, which occurred on the date of United Healthcare's investor conference. So the investor conference, he describes it as a windfall, meaning, as my belief is, what he's saying is the windfall was the fact that it made this possible, and it was a dovetailing of when there would be access maybe to Brian Thompson and when there would be public eyes on United Healthcare. So, and he believed that to be the point, that he wanted to use this as a statement. So I believe that's how the prosecution will argue this and why they point it out. The Fed's letter recovered from Mangione stated, "I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial. Some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, a lot of patience. Based on my own research, I believe that CAD," and this is the law enforcement officer, the FBI agent talking, "I believe that CAD refers to computer-aided design." The Fed's letter also stated, "P.S. You can check serial numbers to verify this is all self-funded, my own ATM withdrawals." I don't know how exactly they would follow that. How would they know, for example, who paid for his bus ticket or what exact dollars were used for that? If he funded it with ATM withdrawals with cash, that would also imply that he maybe had a good deal of cash on him. But regardless, I don't know what the computer-aided design was for. Maybe for printing the gun, since we do know it was 3D printed. Maybe that's what he's talking about. But the fact that Luigi Mangione wanted to make it known that he acted alone, I said in the most recent video, I think that has some impact on whether or not he's going to be able to successfully claim the insanity defense, because it does seem like he knows that other people would get in trouble. This is against the law. This is against community standards. And therefore, if other people were implicated, they might get in trouble too. It also dovetails with about the time when his mother said that he dropped out of sight, stopped communicating with the family. And since he was no longer communicating with them, she actually filed a missing persons report in San Francisco. I assume that was the last place she was able to track him to, and was trying to find out information about where he went. He may also have been trying to make sure that no one in his family was charged in any way with what he was doing, to make it clear that he was acting, as he said, all alone. Based on all of the above, my review of photographs of the shooter and my review of arrest photographs of Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant, I respectfully submit that Mangione is the shooter who shot and killed the victim on December 4, 2024. Additionally, the notebook entries, the Fed's letter, the shooter's apparent surveillance of the Midtown Hotel on November 24, 2024, and December 4th, 2024, and the shooter's use of counter surveillance techniques and escape from New York City all suggest that the shooter undertook extensive efforts to identify the victim, place the victim under surveillance, and track the victim's whereabouts in the time period leading up to the murder. Below are surveillance stills of the shooter and an arrest photograph of Mangione. And you see the photographs there, the ones we've seen before to the right, and then one taken while he was in custody shortly after his arrest on the left. Now, there are several issues through this that I think will become points of contention during the case with what they say here. For example, the fact that they suggest he surveilled the Midtown Hotel on November 24th and December 4th. November 24th was when he first arrived in New York City. It's not surprising that he might go look around the area where the conference was held, but it is very surprising to me that he didn't then go back between November 24th and December 4th. Surely Brian Thompson didn't arrive in town that early for an investor conference that was going to be 10 days later. That's a long time to stay in the city if his conference is not until December 4th. So that means there wouldn't have been any ability for him to really track what time of day was it that Brian Thompson got up and left. Where did he walk? What was his normal path? How did he know that he wasn't staying at the same hotel where the investors conference was? Because if he wasn't staying at the same hotel, then there had to be a path he took, and it could have been from any one of several different hotels. So it surprises me that there are only 2 dates that they talk about there being surveillance. I would think they pulled every camera angle they could get anywhere in the vicinity for a significant period of time, for every day between November 24th and December 4th, because that would be something they would want to know. And yet they only mention 2 points at which he surveilled. And it would seem like that wouldn't really give him the information he needed to know what path Brian Thompson took, what time of day, how long he took, anything like that. It just seems like it is really missing some pieces of information in there, or that he had to have been figuring out a way to access other information that would give him an idea of when Brian Thompson would be walking there. Just seems like there's something missing in that information. And that's it. The shooter inside the taxi, you can see him again, a close-up, the eyebrows and the eyes, which are distinctive and which have, I think, something to do with why he was recognized in the McDonald's. So let me pull out and talk to you about it. This is extremely important because we're finally getting some details around why it is that the law enforcement is so convinced that Luigi Mangione is the shooter. Not just that he was found with documents, but how did they actually track him or trace him? There are also, as I mentioned, some pretty clear problems or gaps. Let me put it that way. There are clear gaps where we're going to need more information, where a jury is probably going to be left with questions if there isn't some kind of information plugged in to fill those, particularly given that in this case, there have been a lot of questions around the motive and whether or not this, for some people, this has seemed to be a motive that would justify a killing. I personally think that's completely wrong. I don't think a motive like I dislike corporate greed. Who doesn't? A motive like healthcare insurance can be a scam and they deny claims for no clear reason. True. Many people are upset about that. But using that then to justify killing is to me a completely different matter. But given that there is that controversy in the social media, on X, in Reddit, there is controversy about that all around. Given the fact that there is that controversy, it is critical that law enforcement plug in these holes, or conspiracy theories will run rampant. If they do not plug in the holes, if they commit the same sort of errors we saw in the Karen Reed case, if they allow there to be a poor investigation where there are gaps and we don't know how Luigi Mangione managed to get this information or to figure out why Brian Thompson was walking right there at that time of day. If they can't answer those questions, it opens up room for all of the speculation, for all of the people to ask questions about whether or not really Luigi Mangione was acting in a group with other people. Right now, law enforcement has said nothing to suggest he was acting in any way other than by himself, and he was very clear that he was acting by himself. So it's important that law enforcement plug those holes, give us answers in that so that it doesn't become a conspiracy theory. Often, law enforcement will come out with some details and some information and figure that's enough. But in the era of social media, that's just not a possibility. You can't just give bare bones outlines, and especially in a case like this with incredible questions around it, with a lot of oversight from social media, a lot of eyes on it. There has to be every single hole needs to be filled. All of it needs to be buttoned up. My personal opinion. All right, Sky Goddess, thank you so much. Merry Christmas to you and to all of you watching. Happy holidays. Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you so much. Beth, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And Marlon, one of our moderators, happy holidays all from Team Lawyer Lee. I so appreciate our mods. Marlon is the person who has designed our emojis, if you're a member, and also our outro. Mama Pinks has been with us from the beginning, and our newest mod, Denise Pelton. So grateful to all three of them for all that they do here on the channel. And wishing them and their families happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I hope they have a great time. If you have questions, if you would put that in the chat with some question marks at the beginning, I'll go through. That'll help me spot it in the chat. I see already some people are doing that. Longtime listeners, like, for example, Catherine. How do you quell reasonable doubt? I don't understand how anyone arrested is presumed guilty with so many poor investigations. Catherine, I'm going to let you in on my personal opinion. I don't believe anyone is presumed to be innocent. That is something we say aspirationally. We want that to be the case. We want it to be the case that people look at it and they say, oh, this person has been arrested, but they come in here completely clean slate. I do not believe they're guilty. The state will have to prove it to me. In reality, I think jurors show up and the prosecution comes in and there's somebody sitting there at a table and the prosecution makes statements about their guilt. And I think the general presumption, you can say all you want, presumption of innocence, but the presumption is law enforcement and the prosecutor wouldn't have brought this person in if in fact they weren't pretty darn sure that they're guilty. Now, the defense may give us a good reason not to believe that, but I think it is very hard. I think that's even more difficult when what's commonly happening now in cases is that law enforcement and the prosecutor do a press conference. They also have documents like this where there is information put out in a complaint so that the public can see that and can look at it and can know the facts. We can talk about what those facts are, but there's no response from the defense because often the court will put everything under seal, will enter a gag order. No one's allowed to talk to the media. So all that sits out there for years as the case rots along, all that sits out there is information from the prosecution. I think that is incredibly unfair. I don't think that is sensible in the day of social media. I think in the day of social media, both sides have to be able to put forward information in a timely manner if they choose to do that. All right, so it's a great question, Catherine. Thank you so much for that. And that's my personal bias and opinion. Maria Z asking, where is my Christmas sweater? That is, I said at our members only, I'll be wearing my Christmas sweater. So what happened was I was doing the live stream on the Delphi sentencing, and I had my Christmas sweater on, and I thought that just seems tacky because this is such a serious event, and here I am in this festive Christmas sweater. I just thought, okay, I'm going to wait and wear that another day. So that's what happened, Maria. Thanks for remembering. Beth A., Luigi's mother told law enforcement that she could see him committing this crime. Can she be compelled to testify against him? So, Beth, there's not a privilege that protects a mother from testifying against a son. For example, there is a marital privilege, but this is a mother and a son. In practical terms, seeing that someone could commit the crime is not evidence that they did commit the crime. She might be put on the stand and asked, is it true he stopped communicating with you in August? Something very simple, very basic like that. In reality, it's going to be something the prosecution isn't going to want to do because that's going to be so difficult for the jury to stomach. They are not going to want to hear from the mother. They're going to know that it's just a loaded witness because it could go well for the prosecution or it could go poorly. It could go well for the defense or it could go poorly. So no one's probably going to want to put his mother on the stand when it comes time for sentencing or something. But in the course of the trial, that's not going to be something they want to do. I would imagine not. Kev Neal asked me, since they lost him in the park, how will that affect the case? I don't know. They did, in a sense, they know he entered and then they know he came out. That's their argument. I think that anytime there's a gap
in the oversight, it gives room for the defense to make an argument. So that gives room for the defense to say, look, the guy came out of the park and you followed him then from that point on. But the guy who came out of the park didn't have the backpack. You don't really know it's the same guy. There was a gap in time, and it'll just be an argument that the jury will have to resolve. But it will be most likely an argument. I wouldn't be at all surprised that there would be questions around that. Willing to grow asking before trial. Not sure. There must have been another part to that question. So maybe put the whole thing in again. I'm not sure what your question is. Willing to grow. All right. Looking for question marks at the beginning. Sky Goddess asking me, will he have a chance for insanity? In my opinion, he knows right from wrong. That's such a good question, Sky Goddess. It deserved a whole video. So I will link that at the end as soon as this processes it, or you can just go to my channel. It's the last video I did on this case. And that was the question I wanted to find out and ask about. It's going to be it's always a hard defense. The insanity defense is difficult to prove, difficult to convince people about. So it's always hard, but will he have a chance for that insanity defense that his lawyer mentioned under the New York state charges? The questions we asked about that, does he know that what he did was against the law? Does he know it was against the community standards, that people would find that to be improper? And I think a lot of the steps he took to cover his tracks, to use a false ID, to use cash instead of a credit card, for example, the things he did will be used by law enforcement to argue he did know. And the fact that he's trying to protect other people suggests he knew perfectly well it was against the law and that somebody could get in trouble, and he wanted to make sure they did not. He wanted to protect them and only make sure he himself was charged. Okay, sunset gazing. Could he have had a backpack inside the backpack, or maybe under easy access, drop one and use the other? And with a laptop, could explain why he was stiffly walking. Well, that's an interesting point. Toward Brian Thompson. And I don't know. I would assume that more video around this. They said they had hundreds of hours, and I assume some of those are around the actual event. And there may be some information from that where you could tell that he had on a backpack, was wearing it a different way. Interesting question. I don't know the answer to it. Mama Pink saying Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and much love for all of the other holidays celebrated this time of year. We love you. So true. And we love you, Mama Pink. Thank you for all you do for the channel. Vicki Bramlett says Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year, and the same to all of you. Going back over for a couple more questions. Pretend judge, does federal court trump state court, or will there be two separate trials? That is such a complex and convoluted question, pretend judge. I personally do not agree with the process, which has been approved as constitutional, of charging people in federal court and state court for the exact same crime. To me, they ought to pick one and they ought to go with that. What typically happens is one trial will go forward. My guess is here, well, I don't know. I'll hold on that for a minute. One will go forward. The other will be on hold and is sort of a backup in case there is something that goes wrong with the one. There's always the other. There has been speculation that the federal charges were brought because the possibility of using the federal death penalty. The death penalty is not available in New York. So perhaps the federal case would be the one that gets prosecuted. The state case would be put on hold, and there would be an attempt to get a death penalty. There are only about 40 people on death row federally. It's not used frequently, but there's been speculation that maybe it would be used here. As far as federal law, to go a little further, federal law trumps state law, but this is different because they both have laws addressing the same crime. And that's the way that this is, and currently they're prosecuting in different courts. Freddie's Cat, will you be on again between now and the new year? Merry Christmas to Miss Lee and the mods. Well, thank you, and Merry Christmas to you. I will not be on next week. I'll be off next week, barring some really event in one of the cases we've been covering. I plan to take next week off. I don't know whether I'll be on again between that time and the new year or whether it'll be right after that. I haven't really made that decision yet. But I will look forward to seeing you for sure in the new year. Definitely. Thank you for your question. And I'm looking for question marks at the beginning, and because that's the only hope I have of finding them in all these. And lots of people saying thank you and Merry Christmas. I love that. I love that. Top Cat asking me, do you think the feds will take over the case on their own eventually? I don't know. I don't know what kind of backroom deals are going on. I don't know whether there has really been a move to move it to federal court because of the potential for the death penalty there. I'm curious about all of that, and I don't know the answer. Vicki Bramlett has gifted 10 Lawyerly memberships. Thank you, Vicki. Both a super chat and gifting memberships. Thank you for doing that. If you are not a member, then there are two things you can do. You can always join using the join button down beside the name of the channel. Unless you're on your iPhone, in that case, you're going to need to go into Safari and open up, or any browser, and open it up there. It won't work straight from the YouTube app on the iPhone. But anywhere else, you can just hit the join button. If you would like the chance at winning one of the gifted memberships that Vicki gave and that other people have given over time, you have to turn on the ability to receive that, and the moderators will put in the chat how you do that so that you can turn that on and maybe receive that. Beverly has been a member for a month. That is great. We are so glad to have you. Happy holidays to you as well. Well, I will look forward to seeing you all for sure in the new year, and maybe in that little gap between the end of next week and the new year. But I will really look forward to that. I hope you all have wonderful holidays and a great time. Happy holidays to all of you.